We are moving to international affairs. Recently, many of our friends and allies were in Kyiv for the 4th Crimean Platform Summit. Participants joined both online and offline, including the Turkish President Erdogan, who reaffirmed his support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and independence.
Онлайн-зв'язком, але неважливо формат, важливо, що сказав Ердоган. Президент Туреччини вкотре підтвердив, що Туреччина підтримує територіальну цілісність та незалежність України.
Within its legitimate borders, and said that Russia should return Crimea because it is in line with international norms. The arrival of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and British Foreign Secretary David Lammy was unprecedented, marking a significant moment both since the full-scale invasion and in recent decades. The U.S. and British foreign ministers arrived in the Ukrainian capital. What they were doing there, we will now find out. Zelensky had a long and informative conversation with Blinken and Lamy. The day before, the Ukrainian president met with U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, followed by British Foreign Secretary Lemieux. Zelensky had a very informative and lengthy conversation with U.S. Secretary of State Blinken and the British Foreign Secretary. All key issues are discussed, and Ukrainian arguments are heard. Long-range weapons supply to combat brigades on the front line of bringing about a just peace. Particular attention was paid to the preparation of the Second Peace Summit. He thanked Zelensky for his support for our independence and the protection of our people. Ukraine to win, as U.S. Secretary of State Blinken has said. That's very good. It sounds better when they say they are with us. They don't specify if Blinken and Lammy are in Kyiv. To announce new aid packages, Blinken announced a U.S. aid package for Ukraine worth over $700 million. We want Ukraine to win, Blinken said in Kyiv, adding, "Our message to Putin is clear. Our support will not weaken. Our unity will not break." During his visit to Kyiv on Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken announced the allocation of aid to Ukraine totaling more than $700 million. Russia is trying to attack Ukraine's energy sector to use cold as a weapon. That is why today we are announcing $325 million in new financing to rebuild Ukraine's energy and power grids. A meeting of the Group of Seven will also be held in the near future, dedicated to helping Ukraine's energy sector. The U.S. Secretary of State announced $290 million in humanitarian aid for gas services, clean water, food, and medicine for displaced people in Ukraine and the region, along with $102 million for demining efforts to clear Russian landmines and munitions. This is what Russian peace looks like. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy also announced a package of aid to Kyiv. The UK has announced the allocation of at least £242 million to support Ukraine in the face of incessant Russian attacks, as well as the deployment of $484 million in financial support and military equipment, the British Foreign Office said in a statement on the occasion of the British Foreign Secretary's visit to Kyiv. David Lammy and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reaffirmed support for Ukraine during a visit to Kyiv. This is the first visit of the U.S. Secretary of State, which emphasizes the unwavering determination of the UK and the U.S. to support Ukraine, the department noted. During his first visit as Foreign Secretary to Ukraine, Lemieux announced at least £600 million in support for Ukraine against Russia's illegal invasion. £242 million to be allocated in 2024-25 for urgent humanitarian, energy, and stabilization needs. Needs to support reforms, recovery, and reconstruction, as Russian missile and drone attacks continue to kill civilians and destroy vital infrastructure. This commitment will provide support to the most vulnerable people in Ukraine as well as contribute to long-term economic recovery and energy needs. Foreign Secretary announced plans to provide $484 million in loan guarantees for World Bank lending to support Ukraine's economic stability. These funds will be used to support vital public services, including the operation of schools and hospitals, payment of civil servants' salaries, and financing of pensions. The UK's support for Ukraine is unwavering. Our £600 million pledge continues our long-term support for Ukraine. This will provide vital support to Ukrainians who continue to endure incessant Russian attacks, Lemieux said. This year's funding includes £100 million in humanitarian aid to support vulnerable Ukrainians, including those on the front lines and those who have moved to neighboring countries. The additional £20 million will double support for power grid repairs and strengthen Ukraine's energy infrastructure. £40 million will be spent on stabilization and early recovery to help Ukraine win the war and move towards peace. This funding supports Ukraine in countering Russian aggression, stabilizing liberated territories, and prosecuting war crimes. According to President Zelensky, Russia has committed 137,000 war crimes in 2.5 years of full-scale war. The British Foreign Secretary announced the first investment in Ukraine from British International Investment. The main thing is to help with solutions. From this visit of the U.S. Secretary of State and the British Foreign Secretary, a decisive step that would allow us to strike a serious blow at the territory of the aggressor country and bring the victory for which our Western allies stand with us closer. At least, we want to believe that this is the case. We were expecting a decisive step from this visit of the U.S. Secretary of State and the British Foreign Secretary. It is important to realize that, despite the large aid packages, this war will obviously not end in a month or two, but it cannot last for years, although we are ready for a long struggle.
Ця війна явно не на місяць і не на два, але при цьому вона не може тривати роки, хоч ми і налаштовані на війну вдовгу, тому що Путін же ж не зупиниться, і на нас він не зупиниться, якщо ми його з допомогою західних союзників не зупинимо і не дамо йому відсіч. Тож, очевидно, що ми...
Putin won't stop on his own. We must stop him with the help of our Western allies. We expected game-changing decisions in this war. The UK may have already made such a decision, but hasn't announced it to avoid alerting the enemy. Meanwhile, the US is demanding a clear plan to destroy Russian military facilities.